A kindergarten class full of young students vanished during a field trip, mysteriously disappearing without a trace, leaving authorities grasping at theories but with no real leads. But then, 8 weeks later, a local fisherman pulled a plastic sack from the nearby ocean, a discovery that would change the entire case and reveal what really happened to the children. Dana Rowe clutched the steering wheel of her sedan with white knuckles, her eyes fixed on the winding coastal road ahead. The highway stretched before her like a ribbon of asphalt, carrying her toward a place she never thought she'd be visiting. A remote fishing dock where the first tangible evidence of her missing students had surfaced after 8 long, agonizing weeks. Her phone sat in the cup holder, connected via Bluetooth to her car speakers. Detective Mark Elwell's voice filled the vehicle, crisp and urgent. "Mrs. Rowe, I need you to come as quickly as possible. A local fisherman pulled up something you should see, something that might be connected to your students." "I'm already on my way," Dana said, her voice steadier than she felt. "What exactly did they find?" There was a pause on the line. A plastic bag containing several children's backpacks, bright colors, barely water-damaged. The fisherman said they were weighed down with rocks. Dana's heart skipped a beat. The school bags? Our Greenhorn Hills kindergarten bags? "That's what we need you to confirm. The fisherman found them in his net off Matagorda Bay. I'm heading there now with my team. We should arrive within the hour." "I'll be there sooner," Dana promised, pressing the accelerator a little harder. After ending the call, Dana's eyes drifted momentarily to the photograph clipped to her sun visor. 15 smiling kindergartners, flanked by herself and the other 2 adults who had accompanied them on that fateful field trip to Banner's farm in Greenhorn Hills. Ms. Lorraine Briggs stood to the left, her curly hair caught by the wind, and Coach Tom Reyes on the right, his athletic build and easy smile making him look more like an older brother than a teacher. It was supposed to be the final field trip of the academic year, a reward for the children before summer vacation. A chance to see farm animals up close, learn about growing crops, and enjoy the sunshine. Nobody could have predicted it would end with 17 people vanishing without a trace. The memory of that day still haunted her dreams. While she had been in the farmhouse with Mr. Clay Banner finalizing paperwork, Ms. Briggs had taken the children to the cornfield with Coach Reyes. When Dana returned, they were gone, all of them. No trace, no clues, just empty fields and confused farmhands. For nearly 2 hours, Dana drove without stopping, even for gas. Her fuel gauge hovered below half by the time she reached Matagorda Harbor, but she didn't care. The sight of police vehicles clustered near the water's edge sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. She parked haphazardly next to a patrol car and leapt out, not bothering to lock her door. The harbor smelled of salt, fish, and diesel fuel. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries punctuating the tense atmosphere as Dana hurried toward the cluster of officers. Detective Elwell spotted her and waved her over. Tall and broad-shouldered with salt and pepper hair, the detective had been a constant presence in her life since the disappearance. "Mrs. Rowe, thank you for coming so quickly," he said, guiding her toward a weathered fishing boat where a man in his 60s stood talking to a uniformed officer. "This is Buckley Grant, the fisherman who found the bags?" The man turned toward them, his face leathery from years of sun exposure. He nodded at Dana, his expression somber. "Ma'am, I'm real sorry about your students. I was just out there this morning, hoping for a good catch, when my net snagged something heavy. Pulled it up and found this." He gestured to a large black plastic sack sitting on the deck of his boat. "Thank you for reporting it," Dana said, her voice catching. "May I?" The detective nodded, helping her onto the boat. "We've photographed everything in situ, but we need your confirmation." Buckley explained again how he'd been fishing in deeper waters when his net caught the plastic sack from the seafloor. Inside were several colorful backpacks, still vibrant despite their time underwater. Dana crouched beside the plastic bag. An officer handed her latex gloves, which she slipped on before carefully opening the sack. Inside were 6 brightly colored children's backpacks: red, blue, orange, pink, green, and purple. Even at a glance, Dana knew. "These are our school bags," she confirmed, her throat tight. "Every kindergartner at Greenhorn Hills gets one at the start of the year." With trembling hands, she reached for the blue backpack on top. Opening it carefully, she found what she was looking for: a small white label sewn inside with a name written in permanent marker: Alvin Torres. "This belongs to one of my students," she said, showing the label to Detective Elwell. Her gaze drifted to the rocks stuffed inside the bag. "These aren't from the school. Someone put these here deliberately to sink the bags." The detective nodded grimly as officers carefully removed each backpack from the plastic sack, documenting each one. Dana confirmed 5 more names: Mila Patel, Jalen Washington, Emma Lou, Noah Garcia, and Zoe Fernandez, all her missing students. "Based on the condition, these haven't been in the water long," Detective Elwell observed. "The colors are still vibrant. The fabric hasn't deteriorated much. I'd say a few days at most." Buckley nodded in agreement. "Those rocks weren't heavy enough to keep them down permanently. Whoever did this didn't anchor them properly. Current probably shifted them until my net snagged them." "Are there more out there?" Dana asked, scanning the horizon as if the bay might offer answers. "Possibly," the detective replied. "If there are, they're either still on the seafloor or they'll wash up somewhere along the coast in the coming days." Dana watched as the officers carefully drained the excess seawater from the bags and placed them in evidence containers. "What does this mean?" she asked quietly. "Were they kidnapped? Or—" Her voice broke. "Are they dead?" Detective Elwell led her away from the others, speaking in a low voice. "If they were killed and dumped in the bay, we would have found bodies by now. Water currents, marine life. Bodies don't stay hidden long in open water. The fact that we've only found weighted bags suggests this is more likely a kidnapping case." "By Ms. Briggs and Coach Reyes?" Dana asked, disbelieving. "Possibly. Or perhaps they were all taken by a third party," the detective said. "Many trucks pass through the Greenhorn Hills area. Remote location, minimal security. It's a possibility we need to consider." He glanced at his watch. "I want to head back to the station, review everything we have so far. Tomorrow, we'll return to the farm for another look. With this new evidence, we need to piece together where these bags came from." Dana watched as the officers loaded the evidence containers into their vehicles. Another officer approached and spoke quietly to Detective Elwell, who sighed before turning back to Dana. "Mrs. Rowe, I need to be straightforward with you. With this development pointing toward kidnapping, we need to revisit all possible suspects, including you." Dana stared at him, stunned. "Me? But I've cooperated fully from the beginning?" "I know, and I appreciate that, but the fact remains you weren't with the group when they disappeared. We need to be thorough, eliminate all possibilities. I'll need access to your communications, phone records, emails, social media." Dana wanted to protest, but knew it would only make her look suspicious. "Fine, whatever you need. I have nothing to hide." The detective nodded, signaling to an officer nearby. "Officer Mendez will accompany you back to the station. We'll sort this out there." As Dana walked back to her car, the weight of suspicion felt heavier than ever. 17 missing people, and somehow she was both the primary witness and a suspect. The irony wasn't lost on her as she slid behind the wheel, Officer Mendez taking the passenger seat beside her. The drive back to the police station felt interminable. Dana couldn't stop thinking about those 6 little backpacks, once filled with snacks and coloring books, now stuffed with rocks and dumped into the bay. She glanced at Officer Mendez, who sat stoically in the passenger seat. "This is ridiculous, you know," she finally said, breaking the silence. "If I had anything to do with their disappearance, why would I still be here? Why wouldn't I have disappeared too?" Officer Mendez maintained his professional demeanor. "Ma'am, we're just following protocol. Detective Elwell is being thorough." Dana sighed. "I know. Everyone's just doing their job." The remainder of the drive passed in silence. When they finally arrived at the station, Dana followed Officer Mendez through the familiar corridors to a small interview room where Detective Elwell was waiting. "Thank you for your continued cooperation, Mrs. Rowe," he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. "I understand this is frustrating, but we need to be methodical." Dana sat down, placing her phone, tablet, and laptop on the table between them. "Here's everything. All my passwords are the same. My birthday followed by my mother's maiden name. You've had access to all of this before." "I know, but with this new development, we need to review everything again." The detective made notes as Dana provided her passwords. "Now, I'd like you to walk me through that day one more time." Dana closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. It was the last field trip of the year to Banner's Farm in Greenhorn Hills. We arrived around 9:30 a.m. The children were excited. Most of them had never been to a farm before. Ms. Briggs and Coach Reyes took the children to see the cornfields, while I went with Mr. Banner to his office to finalize the payment and paperwork. "And how long were you separated from the group?" "Maybe 30 minutes. I didn't check the time exactly. Mr. Banner and I got to talking about the farm's financial struggles. He mentioned the corn yields were getting worse each year because of climate change, and he was hoping educational visits like ours could provide additional income." Dana paused, remembering the mundane conversation that had preceded disaster. "It was just small talk. When I finished the paperwork and went back to the cornfield, everyone was gone. At first, I thought they'd moved to a different part of the farm, but Mr. Banner gathered his workers, and no one had seen them." "Except for Darrell Quintero," Detective Elwell prompted. "Right. He's Mr. Banner's longtime farmhand. He was supposed to be giving the group a tour, but he said he'd left them briefly to get some presentation materials from the barn. He claimed he was only gone for 10 minutes, but when he returned, they had vanished." Detective Elwell made a note. "And you didn't hear anything? No screams? No commotion?" Dana shook her head. "The farmhouse is quite far from the cornfield, and Mr. Banner's office faces the opposite direction. I didn't hear a thing." The detective studied her for a long moment. "You understand that your position is complicated. You're both our main witness and someone who benefited from not being present when everyone disappeared." Dana bristled. "Benefited? How exactly have I benefited? I lost my job. The school board fired me without compensation or due process. No one will hire me with this hanging over my head. I've been living off my savings for weeks. I've lost friends, respect in the community." Her voice cracked, "Not to mention the guilt I live with every day." Detective Elwell's expression softened slightly. "I understand this has been difficult, but we need to follow every lead, examine every possibility." A junior officer entered the room and whispered something to the detective, who nodded before turning back to Dana. "We're going to check your accounts and communications. Please wait here. There's water and coffee machine if you need it." Left alone in the sterile interview room, Dana slumped in her chair. 8 weeks of suspicion, of parents' accusing glares, of sleepless nights wondering what had happened to those children, her children in a way, had taken their toll. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her eyes. If only she'd insisted on handling the tour herself instead of delegating to Ms. Briggs and Coach Reyes. If only she'd finished the paperwork more quickly. If only she'd checked on them sooner. The what-ifs circled endlessly in her mind as she waited, alone with her guilt and the ticking of the wall clock. Nearly an hour later, Detective Elwell returned, a neutral expression on his face. "We've checked your communications thoroughly. There's nothing suspicious in your call history, texts, emails, or social media interactions. Your financial records are consistent with your statements." Dana exhaled slowly. "So I'm free to go?" Yes, but I advise you to stay home and available. We're still investigating this new evidence, and we may need to speak with you again." He paused. "We'll be informing the parents about the discovery of the backpacks today, but we're holding off on a media release for now. If this is a kidnapping, alerting the perpetrators could put the victims at greater risk." Dana nodded, gathering her belongings. "What about tomorrow? You mentioned visiting the farm again?" "Yes, my team and I will be heading there in the morning. We need another look at the site with this new perspective." Dana stood, exhaustion washing over her. "Please keep me updated. Those children, they mean everything to me." The detective nodded solemnly. "We'll do everything we can to find them." It was just past noon when Dana stepped out of the police station, squinting against the harsh sunlight. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous evening, but food was the furthest thing from her mind. The weight of the morning's discovery, 6 small backpacks full of rocks, dumped in the bay, pressed down on her like a physical burden. She slid into her car and sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the photograph of her class. 15 innocent faces stared back at her, their futures bright and limitless on the day the picture was taken. Now, 8 weeks later, their fates remained unknown. On impulse, Dana started her car. She couldn't bear the thought of returning to her empty apartment, where the walls seemed to close in with each passing day. Instead, she found herself heading west, back toward Greenhorn Hills and Banner's farm. Detective Elwell would be visiting tomorrow with his team, but Dana felt a desperate need to see the place again on her own terms, to walk the ground where her students had vanished and perhaps find something, anything, that might have been overlooked. The drive took nearly an hour, the landscape gradually shifting from suburban sprawl to rolling farmland. Banner's farm appeared on the horizon, its weathered red barn visible from the road. Dana turned onto the gravel driveway, dust billowing behind her car as she approached the main farmhouse. She parked and stepped out, the midday heat immediately enveloping her. The farm looked exactly as it had 2 months ago. Fields of corn stretching toward the horizon, a few cows grazing in a distant pasture, the old red barn standing sentinel over it all. Dana approached the farmhouse and knocked on the door. After a moment, Clay Banner answered, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Mrs. Rowe," he said, clearly not expecting her. "What brings you back here?" "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced, Mr. Banner," Dana said. I needed to see the place again. There's been a development in the case?" Banner's eyebrows rose. "Yes, I got a call from the police station. They found some backpacks, and they're coming tomorrow to look around again." Dana nodded. "A fisherman pulled them up from Matagorda Bay this morning, the children's school bags, weighted down with rocks." Banner's face paled. "My God, come in, please." Dana stepped into the cool interior of the farmhouse. It was a simple, functional space, wooden floors, practical furniture, a few faded family photographs on the walls. "So what does this mean?" Banner asked, pulling out a chair for her at the kitchen table. "Are they—" "The police think they were kidnapped," Dana interrupted, unable to entertain the alternative. "By the teachers who were with them, or by someone else who happened upon them." Before Banner could respond, Darrell Quintero appeared from an adjoining room, his expression guarded. "Mr. Banner, I need to speak with you about the Southfield irrigation." Banner nodded. "In a moment, Darrell. Mrs. Rowe has come back to look around the farm. There's been a new development in the missing children case." Darrell's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Is that so?" "Well, I hope they find them soon." He turned to Banner. "The irrigation matter is rather urgent, sir." "I'll just be a minute," Banner assured him before turning back to Dana. "Would you like to look around?" "I can have Mary show you the grounds." "That would be helpful, thank you," Dana replied. Banner called for Mary, a young farmhand who appeared moments later. "Please show Mrs. Rowe around the property. She'd like to revisit the areas from the field trip." Mary nodded, her expression curious but kind. "Of course. This way, ma'am." Dana followed Mary outside, the sun beating down mercilessly on them as they crossed the dusty yard toward the cornfields. "I was retracing the route we took that day," Dana explained. "We arrived by bus, the children disembarked right over there, and then Ms. Briggs and Coach Reyes led them toward the cornfields while I went to the farmhouse with Mr. Banner." "I wasn't working that day, and I'm actually new here," Mary said, "but I heard about what happened. Must have been terrifying, all those children just vanishing." Dana nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "It still doesn't make sense. How could 17 people disappear without a trace?" They walked in silence for a few minutes, the cornstalks rustling in the gentle breeze. Eventually, Dana asked, "Do you know where Darryl was that day?" "He said he went to the barn to get presentation materials." Mary pointed to a large structure in the distance. "That barn over there. It's where we keep a lot of the equipment. Only him, Mr. Banner, and a few farmhands here may enter." "Could we go there?" Dana asked. Mary hesitated. "It might be locked. Darryl usually keeps it secured when not in use." "I'd still like to see it, if that's all right." They made their way toward the barn, a large, weathered structure with a metal roof that gleamed in the sunlight. As Mary had predicted, the main door was locked with a heavy padlock. "Darryl's the only one with a key," Mary explained. "Mr. Banner has a spare, but he rarely uses it." Dana circled the barn, her eyes scanning the ground, the walls, looking for anything unusual. As she approached the backside of the structure, something caught her eye, a small, brightly colored object stuck beneath the door. She crouched down to examine it. "Mary, look at this." The young farmhand joined her, peering at the object Dana was carefully extracting, a feather unlike any she'd seen in the local wildlife. It was vividly colored in shades of blue, green, and gold, with distinctive markings. "That's strange," Mary said, frowning. "I've never seen a feather like that around here. Must be from a bird that was passing through." Dana turned the feather over in her hand. "This isn't native to Texas. It looks exotic." She tucked the feather carefully into her pocket. As she stood, she noticed a gated path behind the barn, unpaved and overgrown, as if rarely used. "Where does that lead?" she asked, pointing to the path. Mary shook her head. "That's off limits. It just goes to a maintenance area that only certain staff can access, and also to the vast desert. Nothing interesting back there." Dana nodded, though her instincts told her there was more to it than that. She took one more look at the barn before turning away. "Let's head back to the cornfield." Dana's feet crunched on the dry earth as she led the way back toward the cornfield, the strange feather tucked safely in her pocket. Mary followed, occasionally glancing back toward the barn as if worried they might be caught trespassing. "The police report mentioned a remote road behind the cornfield," Dana said. "That's where they think the group might have gone." Mary nodded. "There's a service road back there. It's not officially part of the farm property, but it borders it." "Can we see it?" Dana asked. Mary hesitated. "It's a bit far, and the sun's pretty intense today." "Please, I need to see everything I can before the police return tomorrow." Reluctantly, Mary guided her through the cornfield, the tall stalks creating a natural maze around them. The late afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and Dana could feel sweat trickling down her back. After several minutes of walking, they emerged on the other side of the field. A narrow dirt road stretched in both directions, disappearing into the distance. "This is it," Mary said. "It's mainly used by farm vehicles and suppliers. It connects to the highway about 3 miles that way." She pointed east. Dana stepped onto the road, her eyes scanning for anything unusual. The dirt was packed hard, but she could make out various tire tracks crisscrossing the surface. "Does this road get a lot of traffic?" she asked, crouching to examine the tire patterns. "Trucks come through here sometimes to deliver supplies or pick up crops," Mary explained. Mr. Banner allows neighboring farms to use it too, since it cuts off about 20 minutes from the drive to the highway. Dana stood and walked a few paces along the road. She noticed a subtle change in the color of the soil, a darker patch that stretched across the width of the road. "What's this? The ground looks different here." Mary shrugged. "Probably just some oil or mud. Trucks leak all sorts of things." Before Dana could investigate further, the sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Darrell was striding toward them, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Rowe? Mary?" he called out. "You're venturing quite far from the main farm?" "Just retracing the possible routes from that day," Dana explained, straightening up. Darrell's eyes flicked to the dark patch on the road, then back to Dana. "It's nearly 95 degrees out here. You should come back to the house for some refreshments before you get heat stroke." Mary's phone rang and she stepped away to answer it. After a brief conversation, she returned and addressed Darrell. "I'm needed at the greenhouse right away. Something about the irrigation system." Darrell nodded. "Go ahead. I'll bring Mrs. Rowe back to the house." Mary hesitated, glancing between them before hurrying back toward the main farm buildings. "Shall we?" Darrell gestured toward the farmhouse. Dana followed him back through the cornfield, acutely aware of his presence behind her. When they emerged on the other side, the distance to the farmhouse seemed much greater than she remembered. Inside the farmhouse, the air conditioning was a welcome relief from the oppressive heat. Darrell led her to the kitchen, where he prepared 2 glasses of iced coffee. "Mr. Banner had to step out," he explained, setting a glass in front of her. "Some issue with a supplier in town." Dana took a sip of the cold drink, grateful for the refreshment. "I appreciate you showing me around, Darrell. It's been 8 weeks, but it still feels like yesterday." "You've been through a lot," Darrell observed, studying her over the rim of his glass. Dana's fingers absent-mindedly touched the feather in her pocket. "I found something interesting at the barn," she said, pulling out the colorful plume. "This was stuck under the door. Have you ever seen anything like it?" Darrell's expression remained neutral, but Dana noticed his hand tighten slightly around his glass. "No, can't say that I have. Must be from a passing bird. We get all sorts around here during migration season." "It seems too exotic for local wildlife," Dana persisted. "I used to take my class bird watching in the spring. I'm familiar with most Texas species, and this doesn't match any of them." Darrell shrugged. Nature's full of surprises. As he raised his glass again, Dana noticed his watch, a sleek digital model with a distinctive blue backlight. Something about it tugged at her memory. "That's an interesting watch," she said casually. "I've seen one like it before." Darrell glanced at his wrist. "This old thing? It's nothing special. Just a cheap watch I picked up at the market." But Dana was certain she'd seen it before. The memory teased at the edges of her mind, refusing to fully form. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, each watching the other. The atmosphere in the kitchen had shifted, tension crackling like static electricity. The front door opened, and Clay Banner entered, breaking the strange standoff. "Mrs. Rowe, you're still here. I hope Darrell and Mary showed you around properly." "They did, thank you," Dana said, rising from her seat. "Darrell was just telling me about the watch he bought at the market." Banner glanced at Darrell's wrist, then back at Dana, confusion evident on his face. "Was there something else you wanted to see?" Before Dana could answer, Darrell spoke up. "She found a feather by the barn, probably from a migratory bird." "May I use your restroom before I leave?" Dana asked suddenly. "Of course," Banner replied. "It's just down the hall, under the stairs, next to Darrell's office." Dana thanked them and made her way down the hallway, her mind racing. Something wasn't right. The watch, the feather, Darrell's reaction to finding them near the barn, it all felt wrong somehow. As she passed Darrell's office, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, she could see a fireplace on the opposite wall, an unusual sight on such a hot day, especially since there appeared to be flames flickering inside. Glancing back toward the kitchen to ensure she wasn't observed, Dana gently pushed the door open and slipped inside. The room was spartanly furnished, a desk, a filing cabinet, and a couple of chairs. But what caught her attention was indeed the fireplace, where several papers were actively burning. Dana closed the door quietly behind her and approached the fireplace. Using a nearby poker, she carefully tried to pull one of the papers from the flames. It was a receipt stub, but the text was already mostly consumed by fire, making it illegible. Replacing the poker, Dana turned her attention to the desk. A stack of papers sat in an untidy pile, more receipt stubs and transaction records. She quickly flipped through them, noting dates from the current month. As she neared the bottom of the pile, a particular receipt caught her eye. Dated 3 days after the field trip, it documented a delivery of a livestock crate to a private dockyard in Corpus Christi. Dana stared at the document, her pulse quickening. Why would anyone destroy business records? Documents typically preserved for years for tax purposes. On instinct, she carefully folded the receipt and slipped it into her pocket. She had just enough time to return the remaining papers to their original position before hurrying to the bathroom next door. Once inside, she locked the door, pulled out her phone, and quickly photographed the receipt before sending it to Detective Elwell with a brief message explaining where she'd found it and what else she'd seen. Her hands trembled as she returned the receipt to her pocket. The feather, the watch that seemed so familiar, the burning records. None of it made sense yet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled onto something significant. Looking for the exotic feather she'd discovered, Dana realized she'd left it with Daryl. After washing her hands to maintain the pretense of using the restroom, Dana took a deep breath and stepped back into the hallway, ready to make her exit before Daryl or Banner could suspect she'd been snooping. Dana returned to the kitchen, struggling to maintain a neutral expression despite the pounding of her heart. Daryl and Banner were engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation, but they fell silent as she entered. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Dana said, noticing their conversation had fallen silent upon her approach. "I should probably be getting back soon. The detective mentioned they'll be here tomorrow to look around again." Daryl narrowed his eyes. "You've got something in your pocket," he said, voice low but sharp enough to draw attention. Banner looked at Daryl, then at Dana. Dana's heart skipped. She glanced down and realized the edge of the transaction record page was still sticking out. She hadn't properly folded it after snapping a photo of it in the bathroom earlier. With a quick, casual motion, she shoved it deeper into her pocket, forcing a small smile as she caught Daryl's tense, suspicious stare. Daryl and Banner exchanged a quick glance that Dana didn't miss. There was tension in the air that hadn't been present before. "Again, thank you for the hospitality," Dana said, forcing a smile. Banner nodded, his manner distracted. "Of course. Glad we could help." "Before I go," Dana interjected, "can I have that feather I found?" "Daryl, I think I left it here with you." Daryl cleared his throat. "Sorry about that. It got blown away by the breeze through the window. Strange thing, wasn't it?" Dana nodded, though she didn't recall any open windows or breeze in the kitchen. As she prepared to leave, her gaze fell to Daryl's feet, and a chill ran down her spine. The running shoes he wore, white with distinctive blue stripes, were identical to the ones Coach Tom Reyes often wore to school. She remembered them clearly because Tom had once coached a kindergarten mini-marathon in those very shoes, boasting about how comfortable they were for long periods of standing. And the watch. It suddenly clicked. Coach Tom had proudly shown off that exact model several weeks before the field trip, mentioning how he'd saved up for it. The brand name had been distinct then, though it appeared to have been deliberately removed now. Dana felt her heart racing. How did Daryl have both Tom's shoes and watch? She straightened up, hoping her realization wasn't evident on her face. "No sign of it. As you said, it's probably nothing important." "You seem unsettled, Mrs. Rowe," Darryl observed, his eyes never leaving her face. "Did you lose your way earlier?" "I noticed you were gone quite a while." "Just stomach trouble," Dana lied, trying to sound casual. "It's been a stressful day." She noticed how Darryl's gaze dropped to her pocket where the receipt was hidden. Had he seen her take it, or was he just suspicious of her extended absence? The sharp ring of her phone broke the tense atmosphere. Dana fumbled for it, seeing Detective Elwell's name on the screen. "Excuse me, I need to take this," she said, stepping away from the two men. "Dana," Detective Elwell's voice was urgent. "Where are you right now?" "At Banner's farm," she replied, lowering her voice. "I just wanted to look around before your visit tomorrow." "You shouldn't be there alone. The receipt you sent, we've traced it to a livestock delivery in Corpus Christi. It's connected to a series of similar deliveries over the past few months. This could be dangerous information." Dana glanced back at Darryl, who was watching her intently. "I think you're right. There's something else. Darryl Quintero is wearing Coach Tom's shoes and watch. I'm certain of it." "Listen to me carefully," the detective said, his tone dead serious. "I want you to leave immediately. Send me your live location right now. We're dispatching a team to your coordinates." "Understood," Dana whispered, ending the call. She returned to Darryl and Banner, summoning her best acting skills. "That was a friend checking on me. I really should be going now. It's getting late, and I have a long drive back." "So soon?" Darryl said, stepping closer. "What a pity about that feather getting lost. Perhaps we should search for it again. In fact, why don't I show you inside the barn? Maybe you'll find another one there." Banner frowned. "Darryl, that's not necessary. Mrs. Rowe clearly needs to leave." "Nonsense," Darryl insisted, placing a firm hand on Dana's back. "It'll only take a moment. Come on, I'll unlock it for you." The pressure of his hand made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Dana glanced at Banner, hoping for intervention, but the older man seemed conflicted, uncertainty flashing across his weathered face. "That would be interesting," Dana managed, her mouth suddenly dry. Darryl guided her outside, his grip never lessening as they crossed the yard toward the barn. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property, the barn looming ominously ahead. "You know," Darryl said conversationally, "curiosity isn't always rewarded, Mrs. Rowe. Sometimes it's best not to look too closely at things that don't concern you." They reached the barn door, and Darryl pulled out a key, unlocking the heavy padlock. The door swung open with a low creak, revealing a dim interior. "After you," he said, gesturing inside. Dana hesitated, every instinct screaming danger, but before she could decide whether to run, Darryl's patience evaporated. With surprising strength, he shoved her forward into the barn. Dana stumbled, nearly falling. As she regained her balance, she heard Banner's voice behind them. "Darryl, what are you doing?" The farmer had followed them to the barn, his expression alarmed. "Taking care of a problem," Darryl replied coldly. "Hold her, Clay. Be quick about it." Banner seemed confused but complied, restraining Dana's arms while Darryl grabbed what looked like a leather strap from a nearby hook. Before she could cry out, he had bound her wrists and ankles, then gagged her with a cloth. "Find something to secure her," Darryl ordered Banner, who reluctantly grabbed a piece of rope. "This has gone too far," Banner muttered, but he followed directions, helping Darryl lift Dana into a large metal cage near the back of the barn. Darryl reached into Dana's pocket, extracting her phone and the receipt she'd taken from his office. He switched off the phone and tossed both items aside. "The delivery truck should be here in 7 minutes," he told Banner. "We need to be ready." "What are you doing?" Banner demanded. "The police will be here tomorrow. This woman—" "She's a liability," Darryl interrupted. "I saw her go into my office through the window. She must have seen the records. We can't take that risk." Through the gag, Dana couldn't speak, but her eyes widened as she took in her surroundings. The barn, which appeared ordinary from outside, was filled with animal crates of various sizes. Scattered across the floor were colorful feathers like the one she'd found, exotic plumage that didn't belong in rural Texas. A discarded child's shoe lay partially buried in hay near her cage, its small size and familiar blue color unmistakable. It belonged to one of her students. "This has gone too far," Banner repeated, his voice shaking. "Too crazy. This is not what I had in mind. We were supposed to just trade animals, not kidnap people." "Plans change," Darrell said coldly. "And now we adapt." The distant rumble of an approaching truck reached their ears, and Darrell straightened. "They're here. We can't make the transfer here now, not with police coming tomorrow. Tell them to take everything to the storage house in the warehouse south of the maintenance area, in the desert, and remind them to sedate the animals again." He gestured to Dana's cage. "Load her too. Tell them to deal with her properly. No traces." Banner looked sick, but didn't object as Darrell strode out to meet the arriving truck. Left alone with Dana, he avoided her eyes, his face a mask of regret and fear. "I never wanted this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "It was just supposed to be a side business, extra income, not this." But his words offered no comfort as Dana heard the heavy footsteps of men entering the barn, coming to take her away. The men who entered the barn wore nondescript work clothes, jeans, boots, and plain T-shirts that wouldn't attract attention. They spoke in low voices, occasionally lapsing into Spanish as they surveyed the crates and cages. "¿Qué pasa con ella?" one of them asked, pointing at Dana. The man handed the Darrell an envelope. "Payment for this month. Quintana said no more trouble, but I see trouble right here." Darrell grunted and dismissed the man with his hand. "Take her to the storage facility with the rest. Do what you need to do with her. Keep her quiet, forever if need be, but no loose ends." The men exchanged glances before nodding. Using a hydraulic lifter, they loaded Dana's cage onto a trolley and wheeled it outside to where a large, unmarked truck waited, its engine idling. From her cage, Dana caught glimpses of the truck's interior as they prepared to load her. Other cages were already inside, covered with tarpaulins that occasionally shifted, revealing flashes of exotic plumage and scales. In one corner, she saw what appeared to be a sedated big cat, its spotted coat unmistakable even in the fading light. The men secured her cage inside the truck, then returned to the barn for the remaining crates. Dana struggled against her restraints, but they held firm. The metal floor of the cage bit into her skin as the truck's suspension rocked with each new load. Once everything was secured, the men closed the truck's heavy doors, plunging the interior into near darkness, save for thin streaks of light filtering through ventilation slats. The engine roared louder, and Dana felt the vehicle lurch forward, carrying her away from the farm and any hope of immediate rescue. The journey was torturous, hot, airless, and punctuated by the occasional muffled sounds of distressed animals. Dana lost track of time, her thoughts jumbled by fear and the rising temperature inside the unventilated truck. Eventually, the road beneath them changed, becoming rougher, the truck bouncing and jolting as it left paved surfaces behind. Through the ventilation slats, Dana could see they were traveling through desert terrain, likely the southern area Darrell had mentioned. After what felt like hours but might have been less, the truck slowed and came to a stop. The engine cut off, and moments later, the rear doors swung open. "Get the woman's cage first," ordered one of the men Dana recognized from the farm. "Then the reptiles. They're most affected by the heat." Several men approached her cage, sliding it onto a trolley and wheeling it into what appeared to be a large warehouse. The building was dimly lit and reeked of animal waste and fear. Cages lined the walls, many containing exotic species in various states of distress. They positioned Dana's cage against a far wall, away from the loading area. The men then returned to the truck, unloading the other crates and arranging them around the warehouse. "What's Darrell thinking? Sending us a human?" muttered one of the men in accented English. This complicates everything." "He said to get rid of her," replied another, whom Dana recognized as one of the men who had been at the farm. "They want her gone." A third man, older and more authoritative, shook his head in frustration. "What is it with those farm people? First the school children last month, and now this? It's becoming too risky." Dana's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the children. "Those kids were a nightmare," agreed the first man. "Finding a trafficker willing to take them was hard enough, and then we had to deal with those two teachers. Burying them in the desert was not what I signed up for." "At least the kids are profitable," the older man said pragmatically. "Once we get them out of the country, Quintana will make back his investment tenfold." "If we can get them out," said another. "Police patrols have increased along the shipping routes. That's why the last shipment had to turn back to Corpus Christi." The older man approached Dana's cage, studying her with cold detachment. "We need to sedate her. She's heard too much already." "What dose for a human?" asked one of the younger men. "We usually deal with animals." "I don't know," the older man admitted, "just enough to keep her quiet." One of them left and returned with a tray containing a syringe filled with clear liquid. "This should work. Hold her still." They unlocked the cage door and reached for Dana. Despite her bound limbs, she fought back, kicking and thrashing as best she could. Her foot connected with one man's chin, sending him stumbling backward. "Maldita sea!" he cursed, dropping the syringe, which shattered on the concrete floor, its contents spilling uselessly. "Now look what you've done," the older man snapped. "That sedative is expensive." "We don't have time for this," another complained. "The boss is expecting an update, and we still need to prepare the bird shipment." The man Dana had kicked glared at her. "Just give me another dose. I'll make sure she gets it this time." A younger worker returned with a second syringe. This time, 3 men restrained Dana while the fourth approached with the needle. Despite her struggles, she felt the sharp prick as the needle penetrated her skin, followed by a burning sensation as the drug entered her bloodstream. "That should keep her quiet," the man said, withdrawing the needle. But in his haste, he had been careless. The syringe hadn't been fully depressed, and some of the liquid spilled when Dana's movement caused the needle to tear free. The men relocked her cage and moved away, discussing their next steps. "The boss won't like wasting resources on another human," the older man was saying. "After those school kids, he warned us to stick to animals. Less heat, more profit." "Speaking of those kids," said another, "are they even still alive? Last I heard, they were held up at that abandoned shrimp processing plant near Corpus Christi Harbor." "They were supposed to sail for Central America last month," the older man replied. "But increased sea patrols forced the ship to turn back. Quintana decided to keep them hidden until the smuggling route clears up." Dana fought to stay conscious as the sedative began to take effect. Her vision blurred, doubling and tripling as she struggled to focus on the men's faces. Their voices seemed to come from far away now, but she could still make out their words. 15 kindergartners held captive somewhere near Corpus Christi. Alive, at least as of this conversation, but without Ms. Briggs and Coach Reyes, who these men had apparently killed and buried in the desert. The distant wail of police sirens cut through the warehouse, causing the men to freeze. "La Policía? Como?" one of them exclaimed. "Someone must have talked," the older man said grimly. "We need to go, now." "What about the animals?" asked one of the younger workers. "No time to load them. Save yourselves. The boss will understand." One man cursed, blaming Darrell and Banner for the situation. "This is on them, not us." They rushed to the exit, piling into the truck they had arrived in. The engine roared to life, and Dana heard the vehicle speeding away from the warehouse just as the first police cruisers pulled up outside. Through her drugged haze, Dana saw the warehouse door burst open, and uniformed officers flood in, weapons drawn. Some continued through the building, while others stopped to check the cages of distressed animals. One officer approached her cage, breaking the lock with bolt cutters. "We've got a woman here," he called out. "She's alive, but sedated." As gentle hands lifted her from the cage, Dana fought to stay conscious, long enough to share what she had learned. Dana fought to keep her consciousness as officers carried her from the warehouse to a waiting police cruiser. The desert air felt cool against her skin after the stifling heat of the warehouse, but her relief was tempered by the urgency of what she'd learned. "The children?" she mumbled through numb lips. "Corpus Christi. Shrimp plant." "Take it easy, ma'am," said the officer supporting her. "Medical help is on the way." They settled her in the back seat of a cruiser, the window rolled down to provide fresh air. Through her blurred vision, Dana could make out the shapes of officers securing the perimeter and others investigating the cages of exotic animals. Within minutes, a paramedic unit arrived, sirens blaring as it pulled up next to the police cruiser where Dana was resting. 2 EMTs quickly approached, carrying medical kits. "What happened to her?" asked the female paramedic, kneeling beside Dana. "Smugglers injected her with some kind of sedative," explained the officer. "Same stuff they use on the animals they transport." The male paramedic checked Dana's vital signs while his partner prepared an injection. Pulse is steady but slow, pupils dilated, respiratory rate decreased, consistent with wildlife tranquilizers. "We'll administer naloxone," the female paramedic decided. "It's an antagonist that should counteract most sedatives if they're opioid-based, which many wildlife tranquilizers are." Dana felt the sharp prick of a needle in her arm, followed by a spreading warmth. Within minutes, the fog in her mind began to lift, her vision gradually clearing and her thoughts becoming more coherent. "That's better," the paramedic observed, noting Dana's improved alertness. "How are you feeling now?" "More present but still dizzy," Dana managed, her voice stronger. "Thank you." Detective Elwell appeared at the car window, his face etched with concern. "Mrs. Rowe, can you hear me?" Dana nodded, the counteragent working rapidly to clear the sedative's effects. "The children? They're alive." "What? Where?" The detective leaned closer. With growing clarity, Dana relayed what she'd overheard, that the 15 kindergartners were being held at an abandoned shrimp processing facility near Corpus Christi Harbor, awaiting transport out of the country. "They killed the teachers," she added, her voice breaking. "Buried them in the desert." Detective Elwell's expression hardened. "We'll find them, both the children and the teachers' remains." He turned away briefly as another officer approached to report. "Sir, the truck has been apprehended 10 miles south. 4 suspects in custody." "Good," the detective replied. "Keep me updated." Turning back to Dana, he explained, "When we arrived at the farm, Banner and Darrell were attempting to flee. Banner surrendered immediately and agreed to lead us here. Darrell resisted and has been taken into custody." Dana sat up straighter, the antidote continuing to clear her system. Banner said they were just supposed to trade animals, not kidnap people. Detective Elwell nodded grimly. "From what we've pieced together, this warehouse serves as a transit point for exotic animal smuggling. They store the animals here, switch vehicles, then transport them to shipping points along the coast for international distribution." Another officer approached, holding a small pink hair clip. "Sir, we found this inside. It belongs to a child." The detective examined it before showing it to Dana. "Do you recognize this?" With her mind now much clearer, Dana identified it immediately. Zoe Fernandez. She wore it every day. Detective Elwell turned to his team, issuing rapid orders. "Contact Corpus Christi Port Authority and local law enforcement immediately. We need to locate that abandoned shrimp processing facility before those smugglers move the children. Send the evidence team here and get animal control for these exotic species." He returned his attention to Dana. The men who escaped in the truck might alert their boss. If that happens, there's a chance they'll move the children. We're in a race against time now." The paramedic checked Dana's vitals again. "She's stabilizing well, but we should transport her to the station for further monitoring. The antagonist we gave her is temporary. She'll need proper medical care to fully metabolize the sedative." Dana nodded, grateful for the clarity the antidote had provided. "I want to help. Those are my students." "You've done more than enough," Detective Elwell assured her. "You need continued medical attention. We'll handle it from here." As if on cue, the radio in the police cruiser crackled with an update. "Delta Team to base. Suspects apprehended. Repeat, the truck has been stopped and all 4 suspects are in custody." A wave of relief washed over Dana. They had the smugglers. Now they just needed to find the children before anyone else from the trafficking network could move them. Detective Elwell squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "That's good news. Now we're going to get you to the station where medical personnel can continue to monitor you. Banner is being transported separately. I'll stay here to coordinate the search operation." Dana wanted to protest, to insist on joining the search for her students, but the paramedics were firm. While the antidote had temporarily cleared her mind, the original sedative was still in her system and would need proper medical attention to be fully processed. As officers prepared to transport her back to the station, Detective Elwell made one final promise. "We'll find them, Dana, and we'll bring them home." Dana nodded, grateful that the antidote had allowed her to convey the critical information clearly. As the cruiser pulled away from the warehouse, she silently thanked the paramedics for giving her the clarity she needed when it mattered most. Dana arrived at the police station alert, but exhausted, the naloxone antagonist having successfully counteracted much of the sedative's effects. A medical technician immediately took charge of her care, setting up an IV in a small examination room. "This will help flush the remaining sedative from your system," the technician explained, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "The antagonist the paramedics gave you works quickly, but temporarily. This 4 will help your body process everything out." Dana nodded, grateful for the clarity the antidote had provided. "How long will I need to stay here?" "A few hours at most. We'll monitor your vitals to make sure everything returns to normal." The technician checked Dana's blood pressure. "You're lucky they didn't give you a full dose. Wildlife sedatives can be extremely dangerous for humans." Dana's thoughts remained fixed on her students. "Have there been any updates about the children?" "I don't have that information," the technician replied, adjusting the IV flow. "But I can let the officers know you're awake and alert. They're waiting to take your full statement." "Please do. I want to help however I can." The technician nodded and left the room. Moments later, a female officer entered, carrying a tablet and recording device. "Mrs. Rowe, I'm Officer Martinez. I'm glad to see you're doing better. The paramedics made the right call with that antagonist. Do you feel up to giving your statement?" Dana sat up straighter, the IV tugging slightly at her arm. "Absolutely. I want to tell you everything I saw and heard." For the next hour, she recounted everything that had happened since she'd arrived at Banner's farm that afternoon. Finding the feather, discovering the receipt in Daryl's office, recognizing Coach Tom's watch and shoes, and finally, what she'd overheard at the warehouse about the children's location. Officer Martinez took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. As Dana finished her account, another officer entered the room. "Excuse me," he said, addressing his colleague. "We've received an update from the field team. The children have been located and secured at the abandoned shrimp processing facility in Corpus Christi. They're being transported here now." Dana's heart leaped. "They found them? All of them? Are they okay?" The officer nodded. "All 13 surviving children have been recovered. They appear malnourished and traumatized, but with no serious physical injuries. They should arrive within a few hours." 13? Dana repeated, her voice breaking. "Not 15?" Officer Martinez exchanged a glance with her colleague before responding gently. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rowe. According to preliminary reports, 2 children didn't survive the initial abduction. We'll know more once the children and rescue team arrive." Dana closed her eyes, grief washing over her. 2 of her students, gone forever, and Ms. Briggs and Coach Reyes as well. The victory of finding the survivors was tempered by the weight of these losses. "The parents? Do they know?" she asked. "They're being contacted now," Officer Martinez confirmed. "Many are already here, waiting in family rooms. We've asked them to be patient while we process the children and have medical staff examine them." Dana nodded, understanding the protocols, but imagining the agony of the waiting parents. What about the men who took them, and Daryl and Banner? "All in custody," the officer assured her. "The smugglers aren't talking yet about where they buried the teachers, but with the evidence we have and Banner's cooperation, we expect full confessions soon." Dana was silent for a moment, processing everything. Then she asked, "Can I see the children when they arrive?" "They know me. I might be able to help them feel safe." Officer Martinez nodded. "I'll speak with Detective Elwell when he returns. For now, the doctor wants you to rest a bit longer while the IV finishes." After the officers left, Dana remained sitting upright in the examination bed, her mind racing despite her physical exhaustion. 13 children rescued, but 2 lost forever. Their faces flashed through her mind. Which ones had she lost? Which families would receive the worst news imaginable? The medical technician returned to check on her, noting with approval that her vital signs had normalized. "The IV is almost done. You're responding well to the treatment." "When can I be discharged?" Dana asked. "The doctor wants to check you one more time, but I expect you'll be free to move around the station within the hour." The next few hours passed with Dana gradually regaining her full strength. Once the doctor cleared her, she was given a station visitor badge and allowed to wait in the hallway outside the family rooms. Parents arrived in waves, their faces etched with hope and fear as they were directed to separate waiting areas. Some still glared at Dana when they spotted her, their suspicion not yet erased by her role in finding their children. Finally, as dawn approached, Dana heard the commotion of vehicles arriving outside the station. From her position in a hallway chair, she watched as officers and medical personnel prepared to receive the rescued children. The station door opened, and the first children entered, small, frightened figures escorted by officers and social workers. They looked thin and pale, their eyes wide with confusion and lingering fear. Then one of them spotted Dana. "Ms. Rowe!" cried a small voice, and suddenly Alvin Torres broke away from his escort and ran toward her, his face lighting up with recognition. Dana crouched down, opening her arms as Alvin collided with her in a desperate hug. "You're okay," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now." More children noticed her, and despite the officers' attempts to maintain order, they rushed toward their teacher, surrounding her with small arms and tear-stained faces. Dana held them as best she could, murmuring reassurances and fighting back her own sobs. A door opened further down the hallway, and Detective Elwell emerged, his face showing exhaustion but relief. Seeing Dana surrounded by the children, he approached slowly. "Mrs. Rowe," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Dana nodded, gently extracting herself from the children's embrace as officers and social workers guided them toward the medical examination rooms. "I'll see you all soon," she promised them. "The doctors need to check you first, and then you'll see your parents." Following Detective Elwell to a private room, Dana braced herself for what would come next, the full account of what had happened to her students and the devastating details of those who hadn't made it home. Detective Elwell closed the door behind them, gesturing for Dana to sit. Dark circles under his eyes testified to the long night he'd endured, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his expression, the look of a man who had accomplished something meaningful despite the cost. "First," he began, "I want to thank you. Without your instincts and courage, we might never have found those children." Dana shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just happened to notice things that seemed wrong." "You noticed and you acted," the detective countered. "That's more than most people would do, especially after being treated as a suspect for weeks." He sat across from her, his posture relaxing slightly. "We've arrested everyone involved in the smuggling operation, including their boss, a man named Victor Quintana, who's been on our radar for years. He ran one of the largest exotic animal smuggling networks in the Gulf region." Dana leaned forward. "What happened that day?" "At the farm?" Detective Elwell consulted his notes. "Based on what we've learned from the children and the smugglers we've interrogated, it was a terrible case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time." He explained that Banner's farm had been serving as a transit point for exotic wildlife smuggling for over a year. Clay Banner had agreed to let smugglers use his property, particularly the barn and the remote road, in exchange for payment, believing it was just a way to supplement his struggling farm's income. Daryl Quintero, however, was more deeply involved, coordinating directly with the smuggling network and receiving larger payments for his role. On the day of the field trip, a delivery was being made through the back road near the cornfield. One child, Alvin actually, reported seeing what he called a sleeping giant black cat, which was likely a sedated jaguar or panther, the detective continued. A girl screamed, alerting the smugglers to their presence. He paused, his expression grave. In the chaos that followed, one of the smugglers' trucks, trying to escape, struck a child. The children told us the boy's name, Jalen Washington. He died on the spot. Dana covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Jalen, bright, energetic, obsessed with dinosaurs, and always the first to volunteer as line leader. Her mind flashed back to the darker patch of soil along the service road, and to how Daryl had tried to steer her away from it. "The smugglers panicked," Detective Elwell went on. "They couldn't risk witnesses, especially children who had seen their faces and their illegal cargo. During the forced transport to their warehouse, a girl named Mila Patel suffered an asthma attack brought on by fear and stress. Without her inhaler or proper medical care, she didn't survive." "Mila," Dana whispered. Sweet, quiet Mila with her careful handwriting and collection of hair clips. "The smugglers killed Ms. Briggs and Coach Reyes immediately, recognizing them as adults who could identify them. They buried their bodies somewhere in the desert. We're still working on getting that exact location from the suspects." "How about the backpacks?" "You said they were discarded." Detective Elwell nodded. "The backpacks were weighted and dumped into the bay only a few days ago, not right after the kidnapping, but much more recently. We believe this was an attempt to plant false evidence or deliberately mislead the investigation at a later stage, possibly to divert suspicion away from themselves." Dana struggled to process the horror of it all. But why keep the children alive at all, if they were willing to kill the teachers? According to one of the smugglers who's cooperating, Quintana saw an opportunity. Instead of disposing of more bodies and risking discovery, he decided to repurpose the children by selling them to international trafficking operations, presenting them as undocumented minors with no one looking for them. The detective's disgust was evident in his voice. They were planning to smuggle them out the same way they moved exotic animals, through shipping lanes to Central America, where they would be handed off to other criminal networks. But the increased sea patrols forced them to turn back, Dana recalled from what she'd overheard. Exactly. U.S. Customs had intensified monitoring of shipping lanes following several intercepted wildlife smuggling attempts. The vessel transporting the children had to return to port, and Quintana decided to hide them at the abandoned processing plant until the heat died down. Dana wiped away tears. How could people do this? "It's a billion-dollar industry," Detective Elwell explained. "Exotic wildlife trafficking rivals drug smuggling in profitability, with far less severe penalties. Jaguars can fetch hundreds of thousands on the black market. Rare birds, reptiles, even certain insects, all command astronomical prices from collectors who don't care about legality or conservation. He shook his head in disgust. These operations often start with animals but expand into other contraband, weapons, drugs, even people. It's all about profit. Dana thought about Banner and Daryl, one man who'd gotten in over his head and another who'd embraced the darkness entirely. What will happen to them? Banner and Daryl? Banner is cooperating fully, but he'll still face significant charges. Daryl is looking at multiple life sentences, involvement in trafficking, kidnapping, and accessory to murder. Dana nodded, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. The children, how are they? What did those people do to them? Physically, they're malnourished, but not severely injured. They were kept sedated much of the time to keep them quiet and compliant. Psychologically. He trailed off. They've been through a trauma no child should experience. They'll need extensive support. And the parents? They're with their children now. The reunions have been... He paused, emotion briefly cracking his professional demeanor. Powerful. Though for two families, there will be only grief. Dana stared at her hands, imagining the anguish of Jalen's and Mila's families and the complicated mix of joy and trauma the other parents were experiencing. What happens now? She asked. The children will be released to their families once medical examinations are complete. There will be ongoing investigations, trials. It's far from over. But the most important part, finding the survivors, has been accomplished. Dana nodded, feeling drained yet somehow lighter than she had in weeks. Can I see them again before they leave? Of course, Detective Elwell agreed. They've been asking for you. They left the room together, walking toward the area where families were reuniting with their children. As they entered the large conference room that had been repurposed for these reunions, Dana was immediately spotted by several children who called out her name. Parents who had been suspicious of her for weeks now looked at her with new eyes, some with gratitude, others with lingering resentment that would take time to heal. Dana understood their complex emotions and didn't take it personally. She moved through the room, kneeling to speak with each child, offering comfort and familiar connection amidst the chaos they'd endured. A small boy told her about seeing a box with a crocodile inside, while a girl whispered that the men had terrified them, constantly threatening, "If you talk, you'll never go home." "You're safe now," Dana assured them, repeating the words like a mantra. "You're going home with your families, and those men can never hurt you again." Some parents thanked her tearfully, others maintained their distance, too overwhelmed by their children's return to process Dana's role in it. She understood. Healing would take time for everyone involved. As she hugged each child goodbye, Dana felt no sense of heroism or accomplishment. She hadn't saved them, not really. She'd simply refused to stop looking, refused to accept that they were gone forever. The real work, helping these children recover from their ordeal, was just beginning. Walking through the station one last time, Dana paused to look back at the families preparing to take their children home. The image of those 13 survivors, clutching their parents' hands and carrying the invisible weight of their experiences, would stay with her forever, as would the absence of the 4 who would never return. Perhaps one day she would find a way to forgive herself for not being there when her students needed her most. Perhaps the parents would forgive her too. For now it was enough that 13 children who had been lost were found, that families torn apart had been reunited, and that the truth, however painful, had finally come to light. As Dana stepped outside into the morning sunshine, she carried with her both the burden of what had happened and the hope of what might still be possible: healing, justice, and eventually peace.